Oh, goody.
All right, what's going on, everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Marvel Snap video. So we've had some time with the patch that dropped yesterday, and well, things have changed a lot in the one day since we've had this patch, and it's some pretty cool things. I mean, honestly, I didn't expect the changes from this patch to have a too crazy of an impact. It was mostly a buff-focused patch, and some of the buffs were more minor, so I wasn't expecting a huge shift in the metagame, and well, at least so far, we definitely have got one. So today we're going to look at the standout decks from day one and how they're impacting the metagame, starting it off with Agatha Harkness. So if you've been seeing Agatha on the ladder, you've probably been seeing this list. This one comes from Husky Puppies, and he got all the way to a rank 3 infinite with it, and it's a really solid version of the deck. People are trying other versions as well, but I think this one is very close to being pretty perfectly optimized, though I do think there are some other things you can do a little bit of experimenting with it. Basically, the idea of this deck is we just want to discard our Agatha, or get her to play herself as early as possible. So we have Moon Knight, Lady Sif, and Wave as our 3 enablers to make sure that is happening. Black Knight is finally having his time in the sun again, because being able to discard Agatha with Black Knight gets you a 4/14, and then you can bring back Agatha again with Ghost Rider and profit. Due to us wanting to make sure that Moon Knight has the highest chance of hitting Agatha as possible, we are running pretty much 0 other even costed cards aside from the Ghost Rider that can be used to resurrect Agatha. Hydra Bob comes here as one of our just value 1-drops that we can weave into the curve. We have a bunch of 5s here. Honestly, I think the 5-drop spots are fairly flexible. You have room to try different things. I think Stature is an absolute must, as is Legion right now, with a bunch of people trying out the Storm War Machine shenanigans. Claw also, I think, really good. I played a version of this deck without Black Bolt, and I found Stature was still good, but I don't think Bolt is bad by any means. And Vision, I think, is the weakest link here. That's probably where, if I want to experiment with different 5-drops, I would probably try something else in that spot, even though he's pretty fine. I also think this deck could benefit from adding another 1-drop in it. I'll show my version here real quick. So this is the one I've been playing. I have been doing a little bit of like Proxima as a backup plan. I'm not sure that's actually needed, but there have been some games where it has been fairly good. But if you don't have Proxima, or if you don't like lowering the odds of hitting the Agatha, you can very easily just replace her with another 5-drop like Black Bolt or whatever 5 suits your preference. Spider-Woman has also been kind of one of those flexible 5-drops where I like that she has a lot of power while also being out of Shang-Chi range. But the core here is very similar to Husky's list, and I think this core will generally stay the same, because you kind of need to run the 3 cards for Agatha, you need to run Ghost Rider and Black Knight. There's just a lot of cards in here that it makes no sense not to run. I do really like 3 1-drops though, I will say. If you feel like the other version has one too many 5s, where sometimes your hands are a little clunky, I would highly recommend popping in another 1-drop like Silver Sable, as I think 3 1-drops is the way to go with this deck. But yeah, it's kind of wild to see Agatha having a bit of a competitive presence right now. I will say this deck does get hosed pretty hard by Shadow King Shang-Chi stuff, and it feels like it's taking advantage of the fact that not too many people are on Shadow King and Shang right now, so it gets to do some really big stats without worrying about your stuff getting blown up. Moon Knight is kind of cool though, because he can hate on those cards by discarding them from the opponent's hand when you play him sometimes, so that does give you a little bit of defensive protection. But if this deck does become more popular and remain popular, I would highly expect people to start responding to it with Shang and Shadow King, which are very strong against it. Next up, we have the War Machine combo. This has gone quite well for me, and I think there are 2 main directions you can take a deck like this in. I opted to go for the more go wide strategy, but I think there is equal merit in exploring a more go tall option, which I've seen people doing with like Infinite on the top end, and sometimes like Ebony Maw and whatnot. But I opted to go for the very minimal amount of like stuff with War Machine. I don't really feel like you necessarily need Infinite for these War Machine decks to be good. Legion has just been an absolute powerhouse. There's a reason he's in the Agatha deck, because it kind of helps stop this combo, and in this deck it enables the combo. And Legion, there are just so many powerful locations you can combo with Legion, especially when there are ones that kind of lock players out of the game outside of the Storm lane. War Machine Legion is just really, really awesome when it does the thing. It makes it really hard for your opponent to win a lot of the time. And what I like about this deck the most is the fact that you're not all in on the War Machine Legion combo. We are building this optimally to try and have the highest chance of that as possible, which is why we're running Iron Lad, so that it gives us an extra chance of hitting that War Machine on 4 or Legion on 5. And it also has nice synergy with our Dr. Doom to boot. But in general, what I like about this deck is it is generally just kind of a good cards deck. The card quality here is rather high. I'd say Red Guardian is probably the flex spot. It is the card where I think that is the one, if you want to try something else, that's probably the spot I do it in. But I do think Red Guardian has a lot of merit right now. It's just a rather strong tech card with good stats. And then Hydra Bob, another just really premium 1-drop. If you don't have Bob, I think Silver Sable is also a fine replacement who has a little bit better Iron Lad synergy. Kate Bishop just gives us some more stuff to do on a premium body. We have Jeff for the moving flexibility, Claw to fight for multiple lanes, as well as Doom. Nebula just good in the storm stuff, Makari because she's free. It feels like we finally are seeing a lockdown deck that can actually win games again. And after months and months of lockdown being pretty much gone from the game, if you miss this archetype, I think it is a great time to play it. Another deck we have to talk about here is the Skaar deck. So the Skaar deck was one of the better decks in the game. It got hit pretty hard with the nerf to Mockingbird. Is the Skaar deck still viable? So I've been trying out this version of it with Aero. Big Aero fan. I wanted to see if I could find a reason to use the card, and she hasn't been bad here. Though I will say, I don't think the Skaar deck is necessarily at its tier 1 status, as now we have like the Agatha deck is another deck that goes big, and that might push some Shang back in the meta, which was one of the reasons this deck was good, was that there wasn't a whole lot of Shang around. We do have Cosmo, though, as a way to protect our stuff, and if Shang really does pick back up, I wouldn't be surprised to experiment with trying like armor and whatnot. Even with the nerf to Mockingbird, this is still just rather good with Mockingbird. I did think about putting Marvel Boy in here, but it's just hard to find space for all the 10s you want, as well as more early game cards. It's possible you could get away with dropping one of the 1-drops for like an armor. You don't really want to drop one for Marvel Boy because I think you need 3 1-drops for Marvel Boy, but maybe with Kate Bishop it's not quite as bad. And just the Marvel Boy Squirrel Girl combo is just a nice 2-card thing on its own. So those are some alterations you could consider. But I have been pleasantly surprised with this deck. We are trying out Crossbones here in place of a Tuma. Because we are no longer running like the hood, so it's not super beneficial for us to blow up our own things, and things like Squirrel Girl often help us with gaining priority, so Crossbones is a little bit easier to play, but the general idea of this deck is the same. You have some high quality, low cost cards, you slam a bunch of 10 power things, you get a cheap Skaar, try and win on points. Pretty straightforward. I've liked Aero at 510 so far though. Again, maybe that'll change as Shang-Chi creeps his way back into the metagame, but if you enjoyed the Skaar deck, I think this new take on it is still a fairly viable option worth considering. And since we're talking about Shang, let's look at some Shang decks. So, as I previously said, you know, these decks are going big, people aren't respecting Shang-Chi. I think it's finally time for him to creep his way back into the metagame a bit. This first list is a bit of a updated take on the old kind of small cards tech stuff that I ran a while back. And I've really liked it. So Madam Web Control, the idea being we have some pretty swingy tech cards here in US Agent and Shang-Chi, which can dramatically swing the power output of a lane. We have Madam Web to make Vulture and Dagger both fairly large threats, with Ghost Spider and the Kate Bishop arrows acting as other ways to enable those cards. And then we just have, you know, early scalers. We have Angela, who's getting pumped up. We have Kitty, who has good synergy with Elsa. Nocturne is how we are respecting the Storm War Machine combo stuff, being able to shut off their Storm lane. I've just been rather impressed with this deck, since US Agent gets a ton of value here when people are trying to play these big cards. Shang can totally flip a lane because it feels like people aren't respecting him right now, and then between our like kitty scalers or our moving with dagger or vulture, it's often very easy to win another lane. So if you like these kind of more control-y style decks where you're reacting to what the opponent is playing and playing some of these small scalers, I think this deck is a really good choice right now. If you want to take a little bit of a different approach with tech though, Werewolf by Night Clog Tech, I think, is also in a very, very good spot right now. This one gets the benefit of being able to run Shadow King alongside Shang-Chi, and this is the one I'd probably recommend where if you're running into a lot of the Agatha stuff, this should dunk on it pretty hard. I mean, Shadow King deals with the Ebony Blade, Shang-Chi deals with the Agatha. You can clog stuff up, you can make a big wolf. It's just a very versatile and flexible deck that I think a lot of people really enjoy the play line of, because it encourages kind of thinking about your lines more, having to make more intricate decisions each turn, depending on, hey, what am I going to play, what am I going to bounce, all that kind of stuff. I've always been a big fan of Werewolf, and I think it is pretty good for him right now with all these big decks running around. And last but not least, we have a Ajax deck. So Ajax still really, really strong, but I do think the Ajax builds, at least some of them, are going to have to adapt a little bit to the fact that magic is now a bit of a liability because so many decks are running Legion right now, whereas before there wasn't as much location control around. On the flip side though, it seems like there is less Alioth around, so you can kind of get away with hiding stuff behind Invisible Woman more than you used to be able to. This deck does have a small move package with Silk, Nocturne, and Miles, just for some additional stats. We're running the full suite of Affliction stuff, so we have US Agent to shrink their big stuff, Man-Thing to shrink their small stuff, Luke Cage to make sure we're not suffering from any of those negative downsides. Invisible Woman lets us hide the Hazmat early, so we can play Ajax out while still having that go off at the end of the game. And then Cannonball provides us with another way to just solo out a lane, especially if the opponent is just relying on one big card to close it. Kate's just another good 2-drop that also gives us some flexibility with 1-drops to weave into our curve, and Shadow King, again, just rather good right now versus all the Black Knight stuff, as well as other decks that enjoy scaling up. Very curious to see which ways the Ajax deck ends up continuing to adapt to the metagame, but generally speaking, I rather like this one so far. And that's going to wrap it up for our day 1 decks. So it really does feel like the metagame has undergone a pretty major shift with the new stuff people are playing. So I'm very curious to see how this plays out. What more counters do people develop? What ends up like defining the format? We'll see as the days go on. But if you were a little bit bored of where things were at before, I think if nothing else, it feels very different right now. So that's going to wrap it up for this one. If you want the decks, check the link in the description below where you can import them into the game to use for yourself. But I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.